Adeline Foster was 27 years old, and she worked as a night nurse in the emergency room at St. Anne's Hospital in Boston. She had work-cracked hands, and she slept in the basement of her father's mansion. For years, she had trained herself to be quieter than water, lower than the grass, in a house where she was never expected. And then one morning, her stepmother presented her with a choice that was no choice at all. And by the end of that same week, Adeline stood in a second-hand wedding dress before a crowd that had come only to laugh at her. But none of them, not her father, who had effectively sold her by signing those papers, not her stepmother, who was already celebrating her victory, had any idea who the man in rags truly was, or what awaited those who dared to humiliate a woman under his protection. The fog over Boston Harbor had not yet fully lifted when Adeline walked through the wrought iron gates of the mansion on the hill. She was still in her blue medical scrubs, faded to a silver grey from long night shifts in the emergency room. That shift had brought 3 admissions in a row, and the backs of her palms still bore the imprints of rubber gloves. The cracked skin around her fingers, raw from antiseptic, strung with every gust of cold wind. Out of habit, she circled around to the back entrance. Ever since the mansion had new owners, she had learned to move silently and speak in half voices. In the kitchen, the warm, rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, but she didn't even reach for it. No sooner had she set her bag on a chair than Marlene's voice came from the dining room, quiet but sharp and precise like scissors cutting through fabric. "Adeline, you're back." "Yes, I just got off my shift." "Good. The living room floor is dirty. Contractors are coming for measurements at 10 and I don't want them seeing footprints on the oak parquet." Adeline looked down at her feet, the feet that had carried her through the night and now throbbed with exhaustion. "I was going to sleep a little, then clean everything." "You're a nurse. Not sleeping at night is part of your job. Do I really have to hire someone else to wash the floor in my own house when there's someone here with nothing better to do?" Adeline didn't argue. She only nodded, took the bucket and rag, and knelt in the corner of the living room where the first morning light streamed through the tall windows. Sabrina came down the stairs, phone in hand, and walked past her sister as if she were just another piece of furniture. "Please wash around the table legs properly. People have been filling the comments with talk about that lately." "All right, I'll clean everything. And just try not to splash the walls. Your mother ordered that paint from overseas. It cost a fortune." Adeline wrung out the rag and grey water trickled into the bucket. Where she wiped, the wood beneath her hand grew lighter, and she thought that if anything in this house belonged to her labour, it was these gleaming floors that no one ever noticed. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her scrubs, a message from the bank saying her paycheck had arrived. Before she could even open it, Marlene was behind her, hand outstretched. "Give it to me." "I was hoping to keep a little this month. I need to buy medicine." "What medicine? You work in a hospital. Can't you get a package for free?" "I can't do that, Mom." "Fine. Do you remember how many times the wedding agency called last month? They booked the hall, the flowers, the cake, and then your fiancé disappeared. And who had to answer all their calls? Me." Adeline said nothing. That name, that wedding that never happened, each time it was mentioned, it felt like a door slamming shut right in her face. She opened the banking app and transferred every dollar she'd just received to Marlene's account, just as she had the month before and the month before that. "Good girl. Once the debt is paid off, you can go wherever you want. I'm not keeping you here." She had heard those words for so many winters that she had lost count, and they both knew that the day the debt would finally be cleared was not written on any paper. Marlene turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor Adeline had just washed. Adeline finished the hallway, then approached the last door, the storage closet where people kept things they no longer wanted to look at. She pushed it open. Dust swirled in the narrow beam of light. On a cardboard box by the wall lay a picture frame, face down. Adeline knew what was there before she touched it. She lifted the frame, blew off the dust, and the face of a young woman emerged from the void, eyes exactly like hers. Adeline looked at the photograph for a long moment, longer than she usually allowed herself. Then Marlene's voice called from the dining room. Adeline lowered the frame, placed it back exactly as it had been, closed the door and walked away. On Saturday evening, the entire first floor of the mansion blazed so brightly that passers-by on the street might have thought the house was on fire. Marlene had spent enough money to pay 3 servants for a year, hiring a string ensemble, ordering mountains of flowers, and erecting a temporary banquet pavilion in the garden. Adeline was not invited as a daughter. That afternoon, a black staff uniform had been laid on her bed, along with a handwritten note. She was to stay by the drink table at the back of the hall, stay out of camera frames, and under no circumstances speak to the guests. She put on the uniform, pinned up her hair, tied her apron, climbed up from the basement, and melted into the crowd of people with trays. Sabrina stood in the center of the ballroom in an ivory dress, her hand on the arm of Preston Vaughan, a man with a wide smile and a handshake so firm that everyone around immediately believed he truly had everything he claimed. Marlene led him from table to table, introducing him as the founder of a technology investment fund, her voice growing louder with each introduction. Howard Foster sat at the head table with a glass of wine he never touched, wearing the expression of a man silently counting the months remaining before his 3 restaurants finally went bankrupt. Adeline moved through the ballroom with a tray of water, pouring, clearing, wiping, and not a single guest glanced in her direction. And then it happened in an instant. An elderly man sitting at a table near the stage, one of Howard's old business partners, was laughing when he suddenly fell silent, clutched his chest and slid off his chair onto the marble floor. His glass shattered. The musicians stopped. Hundreds of people in silks and finery froze in the ballroom. Someone stepped back, someone raised a phone to film, but no one moved to help. Adeline set down her tray, stepped over the glass and dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" No answer. She put her ear to his lips, watching for his chest to rise. No breath. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck and waited. Nothing. "Call an ambulance. Now tell them elderly male, cardiac arrest, performing CPR on site." No one moved. "Someone call." One of the young waiters finally pulled out his phone and began dialing. Adeline loosened his tie, unbuttoned his collar, tilted his head back, placed one palm over the other at the center of his chest and pressed. She put her full weight into each movement, arms straight, rhythm steady. She worked so quickly and forcefully that onlookers felt chills run down their spines. Each time his chest sank under her hands and rose again, she silently counted in the rhythm of the old song still taught in first aid courses. Her forehead was damp, strands of hair falling across her face. Someone said they should wait for the ambulance, but she didn't even look up. "If we wait, he'll die." She kept pressing. A shard of glass cut into her knee through the fabric, but she didn't feel it. The musicians were silent, the hall was silent, and all that could be heard was her heavy breathing and the repeated thud of her palms against the man's chest. Then, after several dozen compressions, a weak rasp escaped his throat. His chest rose. He began coughing violently. His eyelids fluttered and breath returned, rapid, ragged, uneven, but it was breath. Adeline pulled back her hands and gently turned his head to the side. "Lie still, breathe slowly, help is on the way." She looked up and saw the entire room staring at her. Then someone began to applaud. Another joined, then a third, until the whole hall erupted in ovation. Men in suits rose from their seats, women pressed hands to their mouths, and the sound bounced off the walls, rose to the ceiling, and crashed down on the girl in the apron kneeling in the middle of the hall with shaking hands she couldn't steady. In all the years she'd lived in that house, no one had ever applauded her. Adeline stood, her legs unsteady, and at that moment her eyes met her father's. Howard was looking at her, not with the fleeting glance he gave a cleaner, but with the look of a man who had just realized something. The ambulance had already left, and the guests were slowly dispersing, but several dozen people still lingered in the foyer. They were Howard's closest business partners and a handful of socialites who weren't in a hurry to go home, because the story of the evening was still too fresh to miss its conclusion. Adeline was clearing trays of glasses in the corner when a piercing scream came from upstairs. "It's gone! My necklace is gone!" Sabrina rushed down the stairs, pressing both hands to her bare throat as if she still couldn't believe it, her face completely white. Marlene immediately rose from her seat and spoke loudly enough for everyone remaining to hear. "Where did you leave it?" Marlene turned and scanned the people in the foyer, then stopped exactly where Adeline stood, tray still in hand. "Did you go upstairs today, Adeline?" "Yes. Early in the evening I took a clean towel to the guest bathroom." "Then we'll just look around and sort it all out. I don't want to unfairly accuse anyone." She said it in the tone of someone about to deliver justice, then turned and headed straight for the basement stairs. She didn't stop on the upper floor, didn't check Sabrina's room, and didn't open a single closet or drawer. The whole group followed. Heels clicked on the concrete steps, and someone's muffled laugh sounded and quickly died. Marlene threw open the door to the basement cubby where Adeline slept, took 3 steps to the old wooden dresser against the wall, pulled out the second drawer from the top, and reached under a stack of folded clothes. From there she produced a diamond necklace coiled like a small snake. She held it high above her head. The ceiling light struck the facets of the stones, scattering sharp reflections across all 4 walls. No one said a word. Sabrina burst into tears. Somewhere behind Adeline one of the women sighed heavily. You opened exactly that drawer. Adeline's voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. What did you say? I'm just asking. This house has so many rooms, so many closets and drawers, but you came straight here and opened this one. Are you trying to accuse me? I'm just asking. You were caught red-handed and you're still arguing. Adeline looked around at the people standing around her, the same ones who had applauded her not long ago. Now they looked at her as if they had finally seen her true face. Mom, how many times did I go into the guest bedrooms today? Can you count? Did anyone see me enter Sabrina's room? Did anyone see me touch that jewelry box? What more do we need to see if the necklace was found in your dresser? If I had actually stolen it, do you seriously think I would have left it in my own drawer under my clothes? Thieves usually aren't very smart. Adeline paused for a moment. Then she walked out of the room down the basement corridor, pushed open the storage closet door, and when she returned, she was carrying the old picture frame. She placed it on the table in the middle of the group, photo side up. I swear on my mother's memory I never touched that necklace. No one answered. Sabrina turned away. Marlene's lips twisted in disgust. Adeline turned to her father. He was still standing on the bottom step, gripping the railing, unable to decide whether to come down all the way or leave. Dad, he didn't move. Look at me, just once, and then tell me who you believe. Howard Foster raised his head for one brief moment. His eyes met his daughter's, heavy with a sudden suffocating remorse he was too cowardly to admit. Then he looked away. Don't make this harder, Adeline. Things are already difficult enough. With that, he climbed back up the stairs, and the sound of his footsteps slowly faded away. Late that night, when the last light in the house had gone out, Marlene sat alone in the study. She didn't turn on the overhead light, only the desk lamp casting a small circle of yellow across the room. She took a key from the secret compartment of the desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder with worn edges. She didn't read it. She just opened to the personal information page, placed her finger on the line with Adeline Foster's date of birth, and held it there for a very long time. Then she closed the folder, put it back in the drawer, locked it, and turned off the lamp. The next morning the weather had turned colder, and only 3 people sat in the dining room. Marlene poured her husband's coffee, slid the cup toward him, then sat across from Adeline like someone about to present a plan devised long ago. I spoke with the lawyer this morning. The necklace was found in your dresser. There were witnesses, even guests saw it. If I file a report, they'll open a case, you'll have to go to the police, and the news will leak just as your father is about to sign an investment contract. I don't want that, so I'm giving you a way out. What way out? You'll get married, you'll leave this house, the past will be buried and no one will remember it. Adeline set down her cup. Marry who? There's a man at the fish market in the port who sits under a shelter along the row of warehouses. He has no documents, no home. People call him the port madman. I've already had someone make inquiries. You're joking. I never joke when it comes to money or honor. Choose the police station or a wedding. That's not a choice. No, but it's all you have. Howard sat motionless, his hands wrapped around his cooling coffee. Adeline looked at him. He didn't raise his eyes. That afternoon the family lawyer arrived, a middle-aged man with a leather briefcase, and went into the study with Marlene. They closed the door, but not all the way. Howard was passing through the hallway when he stopped. Are you sure about this? Isn't it enough to have a prepared statement? It doesn't have to be filed now. It just has to exist. A written report of theft with a name and witnesses already waiting in a desk drawer. When we need to present it, we will. And the other side? The other side is the most important part. She left the house of her own free will to follow a homeless man without documents who lives in the port. Think about it. A police report combined with that kind of story, if placed before a judge. What do you think people will think of that girl? They'll believe she's mentally incapable of caring for herself. Exactly. And when a court decides someone can't care for themselves, it appoints someone else to do it for them. Someone from the family. Legally clean, neat, and no one can dispute a single word. How long have you been planning this? Longer than you can imagine, and you should remember that I'm doing this for your daughter as much as for myself. You talk as if we're discussing a warehouse. She's still an asset registered in someone's name, Mr. Foster. The only difference is that this asset can walk and talk. Howard lingered in the hallway a little longer. Then he turned, went back to his room, and didn't say another word for the rest of the day. Late that evening, Marlene called the butler and handed him a thin envelope. Go to the fish market. Find the man who sits under the warehouse shelter. Everyone knows him. Give him this and tell him someone is giving him a wife for free, plus a little coffee money. If he agrees, the wedding will be tomorrow. The butler reached the harbour as daylight was fading. the air thick with the smell of fish and machine oil. The man sat where they'd said, his back against a wooden post in a torn army coat to his knees, a hat pulled low over his face. Butler stopped at a distance, unwilling to come closer. "Hey you, I have an offer for you." The man didn't look up. "My employer is giving you a wife for free, a little spending money is included. Nod if you agree and come to the ceremony tomorrow morning, everything will be arranged." The man didn't move. The butler laid the envelope on the concrete and pushed it with the toe of his shoe. "Did you hear what I said?" The man raised his head. "What's her name?" "What?" "The girl's name." "Adeline Foster." The man nodded. "All right." Marlene never did anything halfway. The next morning, when Adeline was led to the harbour, 2 cameramen and a young woman with a smartphone on a tripod were already waiting, all hired by Marlene. She had ordered them to film everything clearly and without cuts, because this was an important day for the daughter of the Foster family. Rumours spread faster than the sea wind. Fishmongers abandoned their stalls, dockworkers left their carts, a few guys from the cafe on the corner poured out onto the street, and soon a huge crowd surrounded the concrete lot before the row of warehouses. The wedding dress given to Adeline was bought from a local second-hand shop. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, with a yellowed hem and a clumsy stitch on the bodice that was immediately noticeable if you looked closely. She wore it without a trace of makeup, her hair neatly tied back, walking down the slope to the harbour through a gauntlet of laughing people. Someone whistled, someone asked if the bride had brought a dowry or just the smell of disinfectant. A burst of laughter followed. Marlene stood by the family car, arms crossed, smiling at the camera. Sabrina sat inside the car with the window half open, eyes glued to her phone, though the corners of her mouth lifted each time the crowd laughed. Howard stood apart, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the toes of his shoes. The man under the warehouse shelter still sat in the same spot, head down, motionless, as if nothing happening around him had anything to do with him. People began making jokes at his expense. At first they were just jabs. Then someone shouted that the harbour madman had finally found someone willing to move into his stinking hole. Another man roared with laughter, saying they were a perfect match. One rummages through garbage, the other was thrown away as useless. Laughter swelled and spread across the lot. Someone started clapping, and the circle of people began to tighten. Adeline stopped. She stood in the middle of the lot, her shapeless wedding dress fluttering in the sea wind. Then she turned and looked straight at the crowd. "Let me ask you one question." The laughter died down. "That man sitting over there, has he ever taken $1 from anyone? Has he ever cursed anyone in this market? Has he ever hurt anyone?" No one answered. "Then what are you laughing at, because he's poor? Then I hope none of you ever find yourself in poverty, because if you do, you'll remember this morning." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt. The laughter stopped instantly, and in that silence the man under the shelter raised his head for the first time. He stood, brushed off the hem of his coat, and walked to the centre of the lot. Adeline saw his hands hanging loosely at his sides, and for a moment she froze, not understanding why they were clean. His nails were neatly trimmed, not a speck of dirt, hands that didn't match his clothes at all. He looked at her. "I agree to marry you." The words fell on the concrete floor, and no one seemed able to pick them up. The registrar, an old man hired for pennies, awkwardly opened his book and hurriedly muttered a few formal phrases to finish the ceremony. The cameras were aimed at them. Marlene nodded with satisfaction. At the edge of the crowd, an elderly woman in a thick sweater, her hands hidden in her apron pockets, muttered loud enough for her neighbour to hear, "May God have mercy on those who laugh today." The neighbour turned to her. Mrs. Dorothy said nothing more. She pressed her lips together and watched the 2 people standing in the middle of the lot. At noon, Adeline was driven back to the mansion to collect her things. She went down to the basement, opened the dresser, folded a few changes of clothes, her work boots, and the notebook where she tracked her shifts, then packed everything in an old suitcase. After that, she walked down the corridor to the storage closet, pushed the door open, and this time didn't turn the framed photograph face down. She removed the picture from the frame, carefully wrapped it in soft cloth, and hid it under a layer of clothing close to her chest. When she wheeled her suitcase through the front hall, no one came out to see her off. The iron gate closed behind her with a soft click. That night, when the market was empty and the bay's surface was black as oil, 3 men were brought to the warehouse at the very end of the 7th pier. They weren't bound, no one touched them. 4 silent men walked on either side of them, and the iron door slammed shut with such a crash that the sound echoed under the corrugated metal roof. Inside the dark warehouse, a single lamp hung from the ceiling above a long wooden table. Its dim yellow light pooled on the tabletop, not reaching the corners. The man sitting at the table was completely hidden in shadow, one leg resting on the chair rung, his hands loosely on his knees. He was still in the same clothes as that morning, the very ones the crowd had mocked for hours. The three men stood before him, and none dared take even half a step forward. To the right of the table stood a tall, powerfully built man with a crew cut, straight as an iron beam. He spoke first. These three moved a shipment across the 9th Pier on Wednesday night, no permission, no report. Second time. No answer came from the darkness. One of the three spoke, stammering. We didn't know whose territory it was. I swear to God we were hired to transport it. That's all we did. Silence again. It stretched long enough for all three to hear their own breathing. Then came the faint creak of a chair. The man in the darkness leaned forward and his hand entered the circle of light, laying 3 small slips of paper in a neat row on the table, 3 one-way bus tickets. None of the men dared lift their eyes. The bus leaves at 5:00 a.m. His voice was no louder than the wind seeping through the door cracks. You have 4 hours to go home, settle your affairs and get to the station. I'm giving you what none of you have ever given anyone in your lives, a way out. The man in the middle opened his mouth to speak. Quiet, he closed it. Take the tickets, go, don't let me see your faces in this city a third time. The third time I won't be buying tickets. The 3 men bent down, picked up the tickets with trembling fingers and backed toward the exit. None risked turning their backs. The iron door opened and closed again, and the sound of their footsteps faded on the wet concrete until it disappeared. Only 2 remained in the warehouse. The tall man stepped closer to the table. Mr. Gallagher, about what happened this morning. Speak. You stood in the middle of the harbour lot today in front of 100 people, while we still don't know who inside the organisation is leaking information. I have to say, I don't approve of what you did. Ronan Gallagher leaned back into the darkness. Every one of those 100 faces, Terence, I know by name. They live on my land. They eat because of the supplies that pass through my hands, and none of them are foolish enough to open their mouths. And the video won't survive till morning. Terence Cole nodded, his expression unreadable. The man behind the table didn't answer immediately. The hanging lamp swung slightly. Its circle of light slid across the wood, and for a moment it touched the edge of his hand, revealing smooth, calloused knuckles that remained perfectly still. She must not know anything, sir. She will eventually, Terence, it's only a matter of time. Tonight have our people sweep the entire eastern row of warehouses again. I want to know who was near the 9th Pier on Wednesday night, including the guy sweeping the floor. Yes, sir. And one more thing, Terence. From now on, whenever you're in front of her, you're not one of my men, you're a dock worker from the fish market. Don't make that mistake again. Terence turned on his heel and stepped into the darkness. The warehouse lamp went out. Outside, in a small room behind a row of netting shelters, a window still glowed. In it, the silhouette of a woman sat on the edge of a bed, her hands wrapped around her suitcase, unaware that tonight was the first night in her life that someone had stood up to protect her. Adeline had braced herself for a filthy hovel. All day as she followed him along the warehouses, she told herself, no matter how terrible the living quarters, she wouldn't show disappointment. But when he opened the wooden door at the end of the shelters and stepped aside, letting her enter, she froze on the threshold. The room was tiny with a low ceiling, but the floor was clean enough to sit on. The blanket was neatly folded into a square at the foot of the bed. There was a wooden table, 1 chair, and a small spirit burner with a kettle turned upside down on a dry rag. Not a speck of dust on the table, not a single dirty dish in the basin. In her years as a nurse, she had seen enough poor homes to know what poverty looked like, and this wasn't it. You can put your things here, he said, pointing to the corner by the bed. She set down her suitcase, straightened her shoulders, and clasped her hands. This was the moment she'd thought about the whole way, the moment she had to stay calm. I want to make one thing clear, she said first. I'm listening. I know they arranged that ceremony this morning, but I'm not a gift that was handed to you, and I have nothing to give you in return. The man paused, looking at her, then bent down, picked up the blanket from the bed, threw it over his shoulder, and headed for the door. The bed is yours, I'll sleep outside. What are you doing? Spreading the blanket on the porch. It's cold out there. I'm used to it. He stopped at the threshold, turned back, and said in the voice of someone stating an obvious fact rather than making a promise, listen carefully. They signed some paper this morning. That paper doesn't mean you owe me anything. Nothing at all. This door doesn't lock from the outside. You can lock it from inside. He pulled the door closed, and she heard the rustle of the blanket outside, the sound of him settling on the concrete, and then silence. Adeline stood for a long time in the middle of the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands on her knees, remembering everything that had happened over the past 2 days, the applause in the ballroom, the necklace in the drawer, her father looking away, the laughter of the whole market at her back that morning. She hadn't shed a single tear through all those hours. But now, sitting in a stranger's room, a man the whole city called mad, after the first kind words she'd heard from any man in as long as she could remember, Adeline covered her face with her hands and wept. She cried quietly, her shoulders shaking, biting the back of her hand to keep the sobs from escaping. Outside, the man sat with his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the black water, motionless until the sounds inside had died away completely. The next day when the time came, Adeline put on her nurse's uniform, pulled back her hair and stepped outside. He was sitting on the porch with a metal cup in his hands. "I'm going to my night shift." "All right, I'll be back tomorrow morning." "All right." She walked up the slope to the main road, crossed the nearly empty market and went under the dim yellow streetlights. After walking some distance, she felt a strange sensation at the back of her neck, the instinctive feeling of being followed. She turned around. The road was empty, only shadows of stacked containers and a broken street lamp. She reached the bus stop at the end of the harbour, sat on the icy bench and clutched her bag to her chest. The bus was late. When she boarded and the doors closed behind her, the bus pulled away. No one inside noticed that behind them, in the darkness between rows of containers, a man had stood motionless for a long time. He remained there until the two red taillights of the bus had disappeared around the bend. On the third night, Adeline decided to leave. She had spent 2 nights in that bed, and each night she had thought the same thing. She had a profession. Hospitals in any city or country needed night shift nurses. She had stayed so many years in a house where she was unwanted, only because she believed she had nowhere to go. Now she had nothing left to lose. She owed nothing to this man. No piece of paper obligated her to stay in that room behind the netting shelters. Late in the evening, she packed her suitcase again, put her shift notebook at the very bottom, checked that her mother's photograph was securely wrapped, and waited until he was gone. She left a 3-line note on the wooden table, thanking him for the 2 nights, apologizing for the trouble, and asking him not to look for her. The bus station on the other side of the city was flooded with white light. The air smelled of diesel and vending machine coffee. Adeline bought a ticket for the last night bus south and sat in the waiting room, her suitcase clutched between her knees. The departure time on the electronic board crept closer. She looked at it, then down at her hands clasped together. Then someone sat down a few seats away. She turned. He was wearing the same coat, hands on his knees, eyes fixed on the board rather than on her. Adeline froze. She had prepared every phrase in case he tried to stop her, words for argument, for pleading, for a firm refusal. She was ready for everything except what he did. He said nothing. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, laid it on the bench between them and gently pushed it toward her. "What's this? Money? I won't take it. No one should start over without a penny. I said I won't take it." "Then leave it there." He stood. Adeline looked at him, and for the first time since that morning at the harbour she met his eyes without looking away. "You're not going to stop me?" "No, they signed papers. I already told you what that paper means." "Then why did you come?" He paused a moment. "So you wouldn't have to leave in the middle of the night with no one knowing where you're going." Then he turned and walked toward the station exit, not looking back once. His figure disappeared through the glass doors. Adeline was left alone, the envelope lying on the bench beside her. The loudspeaker announced final boarding for the southern route. People picked up their bags, rose from their seats and lined up at gate 4, handing their tickets to the attendant. She didn't move. In all the years she'd lived in that house on the hill, no one had ever asked what she wanted. When she was told to wash the floors, she washed them. When she was told to give up her earnings, she gave them. When she was told to marry, she married. All her life someone else had opened and closed doors for her. And now a man living in a cubby behind the netting shelters, who seemed to have nothing to his name, had just handed her an open doorway and simply walked away, leaving her the choice to step through or not. The final call came over the loudspeaker. The bus doors closed. The vehicle pulled away from the terminal. Its red taillights slid across the glass before disappearing around the corner. Adeline remained seated. The station gradually emptied. Cleaners began moving chairs. She took the envelope, her suitcase, walked through the glass doors and set off. The road back to the harbour was very long. By the time she returned, dawn was breaking. He was sitting on the porch with the same metal cup in his hands, as if he'd never left. He looked at her and asked nothing. She put the envelope on the wooden table. "I didn't spend $1. I know." The days stretched into a strange rhythm that Adeline couldn't name. She worked the night shift, returned home in the morning to sleep, and after waking in the afternoon she would do her chores. He left early, returned late, never saying where he'd been, never bringing anything worth asking about. They slept on opposite sides of the same door. In a whole day they exchanged at most a few dozen words, but certain things began to raise suspicions. First there was the video. At the hospital, a young nurse handed Adeline her phone, her face pale with embarrassment. She said the recording of the wedding at the port had spread across the city. Adeline didn't watch it, but the next day the same nurse returned, frowning, saying something incredible had happened. All copies of the video had disappeared overnight, even those that people had downloaded and reposted, and the account that started it all had been blocked without explanation. The second oddity occurred on a rainy afternoon. He was splitting wood in the yard behind the room, sleeves rolled up. When he reached for the axe, Adeline noticed a long scar on his forearm. She was a nurse. She knew immediately that it wasn't just a healed wound. The scar was thin and even, the stitches placed with surgical precision. Only a professional could have stitched it that way. Something in the curve of that line made her freeze in the middle of the yard, her heart skipping a beat for reasons she couldn't explain. She was about to ask, but he had already pulled down his sleeve. The third strangeness was known to the whole market. A row of streetlights along the harbour hadn't worked since the start of the season. People had called the city multiple times, but each time they were told to wait, until the whole neighbourhood had grown used to walking in the dark. And then one night, just one night, Adeline was returning from work at dawn and saw the entire row of lights blazing from the top of the hill to the very end of the pier. The bulbs were new, the poles freshly painted. The fishmonger at the first stall stood with her hands on her hips, staring up and muttering that someone at City Hall must have suddenly changed their mind. Adeline stood under that bright light for a long time before walking on. She began noticing small things. No one in the market dared speak to him rudely, though behind his back they called him cruel names. The dockworker from the eastern warehouses, a tall man with a crew cut, nodded at her every time he passed their room, and that nod was too deliberate, his back too straight for an ordinary labourer. One day she asked what he did for a living, and he said he took any work offered. She asked where he had lived before, and he said he'd always lived in this area. She asked if he had a family. That time he was silent for so long that she understood she shouldn't ask any more. And then came that night. Adeline's shift was rescheduled and she returned earlier than usual. After sleeping for a while she woke with a dry throat. The room was dark, the door was still closed. She sat up, went outside barefoot and reached for the kettle on the table when she heard voices from behind the row of warehouses. She froze. It was his voice, but not the one she heard every day. It was low, measured, the voice of a man who rarely spoke, yet it sounded completely different. Dry and sharp, each word like a shot, the voice of a man giving an order, absolutely certain it would be obeyed. No, from tonight, shut down the entire route. I don't care who signed the contract. Adeline held her breath. Tell him he has until Monday morning. After that there'll be no one to talk to. The name of whoever signed the order must be on my desk by dawn. She took a step back, then another. Under her bare heel a loose floorboard creaked, the dry sound cutting through the night silence. Outside the voice stopped instantly. Not another sound, only the water lapping at the pier below and her heart pounding in her chest. The door opened. He stood in the doorway in the dark and Adeline retreated until the edge of the wooden table pressed into her back. She didn't run. She straightened, gripping the table's edge with both hands, and heard her own voice calmer than expected in the darkness. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him and turned on the small lamp on the table. In the dim yellow light, his face didn't look like that of a man caught red-handed. It just looked tired. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to understand. The man out there and the man who splits wood in this yard aren't the same person." "Yes." "What does yes mean?" "It means you understood correctly." Adeline stared at him. She had been ready for him to deny it, ready for him to say she'd misunderstood, that it was just small business, that her ears had played tricks on her in the dark. She hadn't been ready for him to simply nod. "Then tell me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because there are things that, once you know them, you can't go back from, and because I have enemies bigger than you can imagine. The less you know, the safer you are. You talk as if you're protecting me. I am protecting you. From whom? From those who want to hurt you. Then what's my place in all this? I sleep in your room, eat your food, and carry your name on a piece of paper I never signed. Adeline, I was given away like a thing. I accepted it, I never complained. But at least I deserve to know what I've gotten myself into." He was silent. "You have many enemies. You get calls at 3 in the morning, your people nod at you thinking I don't notice, so I'll ask you only one question." She stepped forward and the lamplight fell on her face. "Who am I in your game?" He didn't answer. She waited. She waited for a very long time, longer than anyone still clinging to hope can wait. He only looked at her the whole time. His lips trembled, his hands clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Adeline nodded, so there was something after all. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. People only stay silent like that when the answer shames them. She turned away, pulled the blanket off the bed, pressed it to her chest, walked to the kitchen corner at the far end of the room and sat on the floor, her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Adeline, don't. Tonight I don't want to hear another word from you. He stood there a moment longer, then turned off the lamp, opened the door and went outside. Near dawn, on the container lot east of the pier, a long black car sat between two rows of cargo containers, headlights off, engine idling quietly. Terence Cole sat in the back seat with an open folder on his knees. We searched the entire eastern warehouse district. We found no one. Whoever did this knows how to erase all traces. Sir, then stop searching. Sir, block everything. Every cash flow through the port, every intermediary account, every transport contract filed under shell names, every single one. From tomorrow morning, not a dollar passes through anyone's hands without going through mine first. That will paralyze the whole system for at least a few weeks. Yes, and people inside the organization will start to panic. That's exactly what I want. A rat never dies because of a cat, Terence. It dies because it has nothing to eat. Block everything, and the one who panics first is the one I need to find. Terence closed the folder. Anything else, sir? Yes, St. Anne's Hospital. The hospital, sir. From tonight that location is under special observation. The night shift, the parking lot, the bus stop at the harbour, our people are to keep their distance. No uniforms, no company cars. If anything happens to her, even a harsh word, I want to know within 10 minutes. Yes, sir. And Terence? Yes, sir. She must never find out. Across town on Beacon Hill, that morning began with a call from the bank. Howard Foster stood in the middle of his study, gripping the phone, and had to ask the caller to repeat the news twice. The entire debt on his chain of 3 restaurants, the debt that had hung over his family season after season, costing him so many sleepless hours that his hair had gone completely grey, had just been bought out by an investment fund. The caller added that the buyer wished to remain anonymous and had not yet set any repayment terms. What do you mean, no terms? It means you don't owe us anymore. You owe them, but they're not demanding payment. Howard set down the phone and sank heavily into his chair. Marlene stood in the doorway. She had heard everything. It was Preston. Are you sure? Who else could it be? He's marrying my daughter. He doesn't want the family of his future bride to bear the shame of debt when he appears before the investment world. That's how wealthy people do business, Mr. Foster. They don't need to boast about it. She walked to the desk and pulled the calendar toward her. Move the engagement ceremony up to the end of this month. So soon? Yes, that soon. Everything must be finished before spring. Howard looked up at his wife. She didn't explain anything. She just closed the calendar, left the room, and began calling the restaurant to book the banquet. The engagement celebration was held in a hotel ballroom by the river. Marlene invited twice as many guests as she'd originally planned, including people she'd never been close to, because she wanted the whole city to see her daughter beside the man who had quietly cleared the family's debts. Preston arrived half an hour late, entered to applause, kissed Sabrina's hand, and for the first half of the evening everything looked perfect, like a photograph. Then the champagne began to flow. At the entrance to the ballroom, an argument broke out. 2 men in coats stood outside demanding to be let in, blocking the waiter's path. One of them said loudly enough for the whole room to hear that he just needed 5 minutes with Preston Vaughan about the money Mr. Vaughan had promised to return by Christmas. The ballroom fell silent. Preston laughed, waved dismissively, said it was just equipment suppliers for the fund, a minor accounting issue, and stepped outside to talk to them. Marlene immediately signalled the orchestra to keep playing, but the worst was yet to come. Half an hour later, as guests began to leave, the sound of a tow truck came from the parking lot. It was lifting Preston's sports car, and a man with papers in hand, not bothering to lower his voice, informed the hotel security that the car was leased, payments long overdue, and the rental company had come to reclaim it. More than a dozen guests stood watching. Sabrina came outside, caught her heel on the stone step, and stared at the receding car, then at Preston, who was waving his arms, trying to explain. She turned to her mother, but Marlene, as if nothing had happened, kept smiling and shaking hands with departing guests, apologizing for minor organizational mishaps and promising to see them at the wedding. She never once glanced at her daughter to see if she could still stand. That night when the whole house was asleep, Howard Foster sat alone in his study by the desk lamp, staring at the phone before him. He sat there for a very long time. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out an old business card from a man who had once conducted an investigation for his company. In better days, he dialed the number. A voice answered after the fourth ring. "I need you to look into someone quietly. No one is to know, including my wife." "What's the name, Mr. Foster?" Howard looked out the window at the city lights stretching toward the bay and remembered his daughter's eyes, the ones he had turned away from in the basement of his own house. "Preston Vaughan. I want to know everything he hasn't told us." That week, the emergency room was short-staffed, and Adeline took extra shifts. She worked several nights in a row without rest, returning home after dawn, sleeping only a few hours, then getting up and leaving again. She did it partly because the hospital needed her, and partly because the room behind the fishing nets had become filled with a silence she didn't know how to break. Since the night she had taken the blanket to the kitchen corner, they continued to eat at the same table and exchange just enough words to get through the day. But another door had closed between them, and neither mentioned it. Then on Friday morning, as soon as Adeline crossed the threshold, the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She managed to grab the edge of the table. After that she remembered nothing. She woke in a dim, uncertain light, unable to tell if it was morning or day. Her body burned with fever, her throat so dry and raw that even swallowing hurt. A damp cloth lay on her forehead. She stirred and a hand held her head gently, lifting it. "Drink." The water was warm with a hint of ginger. She took a few sips before lying back down. "How long was I asleep?" "Since yesterday. The hospital, I sent them a message, they said you need to rest." She closed her eyes. In her delirium, fragments flashed through her mind. The sound of ventilators in the ward, the laughter at the market, the sharp tap of her stepmother's heels on freshly washed wood. At one point, she heard her own voice, quietly calling for someone she hadn't named aloud since she was too young to understand what had happened to her family. "Mama." The hand adjusting the cloth on her forehead paused for a moment. By late that night the fever had broken. She opened her eyes and saw him. He sat on the wooden chair pulled up to the bed, elbows on his knees. A small pot simmered on the spirit burner. He filled a bowl, sat down again and handed it to her. "Mrs. Dorothy from the soup kitchen at the market entrance showed me how. She said soup for the sick needs to simmer for a long time. You can't rush it." Adeline held the bowl in both hands. The soup was hot with potatoes and pieces of chicken, seasoned just right for a sick person. She ate half before she had to stop. Her throat caught, and it wasn't from the illness. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said. "It's just been a long time since anyone cooked for me when I was sick." He said nothing. She finished the soup, set the bowl down, then leaned back against the wall and pulled the blanket higher. "Did you sit here all night?" "Yes. You didn't have to." "I know." Outside, the water lapped against the piers. Then he began to speak slowly, like a man telling a story so old it no longer hurt. "My mother worked as a cleaner in the buildings around this harbour. She cleaned warehouses for a contractor, places where dust settled on the walls in thick layers where workers were told to go in and do their jobs, and if they needed masks they could buy their own. She worked there for many years." "What happened?" She started coughing. At first it was a dry cough. Later she began coughing up blood. "I was very young that year. All I remember is sitting in the hospital corridor and counting the tiles on the floor. The doctor said it was her lungs, the dust, the chemicals. All those years she spent working there, did they pay her compensation?" "No." "Did someone help her file a claim?" "It was sent, then set aside and forgotten. That contractor had money, lawyers and connections. We had only a piece of paper." He looked down at his hands. "After she died, I learned something I believed for a very long time, that justice in this city could be bought. Whoever can pay the price gets it. So I told myself, all right, I'll earn so much money that no one will ever be able to buy me." "It was the wrong lesson." "I know," he said, "but at the time I had no other lesson to learn." Adeline looked at him for a long time. "That's why you never mistreat the poor people in this market." He neither confirmed nor denied it. He just stood, took the empty bowl and carried it to the sink. "Since my mother died," he said, his back to her, "only one person has treated me like a living being. I'm still in that person's debt." Adeline recovered and returned to her shifts at the start of the following week. She lasted only 2 nights. On Wednesday afternoon, as soon as she arrived at the unit, the head nurse stopped her in the corridor, looking uncomfortable, and said administration wanted to see her immediately. In the conference room, 3 people waited: a representative from HR, someone from pharmacy management, and the head of the emergency department. A stack of papers lay on the table. A complaint has been filed against you, said the HR rep. Anonymous, you're accused of taking medications from the supply cabinet and removing them from the hospital. Adeline stood frozen. I never did that. We understand it's still only an accusation, but the complainant included evidence. He turned the first page. We have a copy of a theft report from your private home, and your name appears on it. She looked at the paper. Her name sat in the center of the page, neatly typed, and she recognized it immediately. The evening in the basement of her father's house, now formalized and filed as an official document. This is not true. Miss Foster, we haven't reached a final decision yet, but when an accusation involves medication, procedure requires us to temporarily suspend you while we verify inventory and dispensing records. You'll receive full pay and we'll contact you when the review is complete. How long will that take? The three exchanged glances. No one answered. Adeline nodded, removed her work badge from around her neck, placed it on the table and left. She walked all the way back to the harbour, not taking the bus. The sky was growing darker. The sea wind blew toward her as the road ended at the pier. She walked to the very end, where black wooden pilings were thick with barnacles, and stopped, looking down. The water beneath was black as ink, waves lapping steadily at the wood, and inside her was a strange and terrible silence. They had taken her home, her job, her good name, even her father. She had held on only because every night she could put on that blue uniform, place her hands on a stranger's chest, and pull life from the darkness. It was the only thing she had left, the only thing no one could touch, and now they'd taken that too. She didn't cry. She just stood there for a very long time, hands at her sides, staring into the water. Then she heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind her, slow and careful, accompanied by the heavy breathing of an old woman climbing up the slope. Little one, Adeline. The elderly woman was in her thick sweater, the one she wore all year round, with traces of flour still on her hands from the soup kitchen at the market entrance. What are you doing out here, standing so long? This wind will knock anyone over. I just came out for some air, Mrs. Dorothy. Yes, air. Mrs. Dorothy walked up and stood beside her, looking at the water as if it held something fascinating. Then she reached out and wrapped her hand around Adeline's wrist, not pulling, just holding. Come to my place, I just made a pot of broth. Sit down, have a cup, then you can think. Mrs. Dorothy, I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. She took Adeline's hand and led her back toward the shore. The old woman's grip, though wrinkled, was unexpectedly strong. Halfway across the pier she suddenly stopped, turned Adeline's palm upward and examined it under the streetlight, the cracked fingers, the calluses at their base. She looked a little longer than necessary. Is something wrong? No, said the old woman. I knew a man with hands just like yours, exactly like them. Who was it? Mrs. Dorothy released her hand and adjusted her sweater. That was a long time ago. Come on. She walked Adeline back to the netting sheds, then turned and went her own way. Adeline sat on the step by the door and wrapped her arms around her knees. She didn't know how long she'd been there when a man's shadow fell across the concrete before her. He didn't ask what had happened. He said nothing about the hospital, the complaint, or the people who'd sent it. He just took off his coat, draped it over her shoulders, and sat down beside her on the step, leaving just enough space between them. One rainy evening, he said, a long time ago. Adeline didn't look up. She pulled the coat tighter. What rainy evening? A man was lying in the passage behind the emergency room at St. Anne's Hospital, he said. He had no documents. No one with him. Blood soaked through the side of his shirt. He managed to crawl there because it was the nearest place with a light on. Adeline turned to him. The security guards came and were about to call the police, because procedure required it. A man without documents, wounded, he knew what kind of trouble he was in. But then a nurse came out. He paused. She knelt on the wet concrete, didn't ask his name, didn't ask who did it, didn't ask if he had money. She asked only one question, "Can you still hear me?" Adeline sat perfectly still. She took him to a small procedure room in the back, cleaned the wound herself, and stitched it herself. She worked very slowly and carefully, so carefully that he had to ask why she was taking such care. She told him that any wound eventually becomes a scar, but whether that scar is beautiful or ugly depends on whether the one holding the needle believes the person before them is human. Adeline's hand tightened on the edge of the coat. When she finished, she said he needed medicine or infection would set in. He said he had no money to buy it. She left, came back after a while, slipped something into his coat pocket and told him to leave before the shift changed. He reached into his own coat pocket, pulled out a small object and placed it on the concrete step between them, a box of antibiotics. The cardboard was soft from being held too often, edges worn white, the label nearly rubbed off. In the corner, in handwriting, the dosage was written, a slightly tilted hand, written in haste during a night shift. Adeline looked down. She looked for a very long time. Then she reached out, her fingers trembling so much that she had to touch the box twice before she could pick it up. This is from my personal locker. Yes, my locker. This wasn't hospital property. I know. She turned it over and stared at her own handwriting. In that moment, all the scattered pieces of the past days suddenly fell into place. The scar on his forearm, the stitches that had looked so familiar, his deliberate calm beneath the ragged clothing. The 4 words he had spoken in that concrete lot filled with laughter. You recognized me that day, she said, from the moment you stood in the middle of that lot and asked the whole market what they were laughing at. No, before that, she looked up. Even before I came here, he nodded. They came to the market looking for me. They said someone was giving me a wife for free. I asked her name. They said yours. Adeline brought her hand to her mouth. So you already knew. I already knew. You married me because of this box of medicine. He was silent for a long time. The water beat against the pier in a steady, unhurried rhythm. I stepped forward that morning out of obligation, he said. Yes, you asked, and I'll tell you the truth. If they had named someone else, I wouldn't have gotten up from under that shelter. But hear me out to the end. He turned to look at her. That obligation bought exactly 1 morning, nothing more. Everything after that, every time I laid my mattress outside this door, every time I stood in the dark waiting for your bus to disappear, every night I sat by that bed, none of it had anything to do with that box of medicine. I stayed because of you. Adeline lowered her head. Her tears fell onto the hand holding the medicine, 1 drop then many more. She didn't wipe them away. All these years, she said, her voice breaking, I thought everything I did just fell into the void and disappeared. No one remembered, no one kept anything. Someone kept it. She shook her head, laughing through tears. Why did it have to be you of all people in this city? There are no coincidences, he said. I had people looking for you all that time. Before winter, I knew you worked at St. Anne's, and this harbour has always been mine. I was hiding here because it's my territory, and for no other reason. My stepmother, she didn't choose who to target. She just went looking for the man with the worst reputation in the district. He looked out at the black water, and they pointed her straight at me. That night they sat together until dawn, no longer 2 people divided by a door but 2 sharing a single step. Adeline still held the box of medicine in her hand. She told him about the complaint, the conference room with 3 people waiting, the batch she'd left on the table. He listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he said only one thing: the truth would come out and she shouldn't give up her calling because of some paper written by anyone. Toward morning, she fell asleep against his shoulder. He didn't move until the sky began to lighten, but what came with that morning was not peace. Late that afternoon, as Adeline hung laundry in the yard behind the house, she heard the rumble of engines, not 1 car but many. Tires hummed on the wet concrete of the harbour approach, steady, unhurried, without fuss. The way cars drive when the driver knows no one will dare stand in their way. She walked around the front of the building and stopped. The entire yard before the row of warehouses, the same concrete lot where they had laughed in her face while she stood in a borrowed wedding dress, was now filled with a line of black cars. The fishmongers had abandoned their stalls. The men from the cafe poured out into the doorway. Silence fell over the market. The door of the first car opened. A tall man with a crew cut stepped out, and Adeline immediately recognized the dockworker from the eastern warehouses, the one who always nodded at her. But today he wore a black suit, and he moved nothing like a man accustomed to hauling cargo. He crossed the lot in a straight line, stopped 3 paces from the porch and dropped to 1 knee on the concrete. Mr. Gallagher. Behind him, the line of men who had stepped out of the cars lowered their heads as one. Adeline gripped the doorframe. She looked at those bent backs, at the man kneeling before the threshold of her home, then turned her gaze to her husband, who still stood there in his torn clothes with a metal cup in his hand. Speak, his voice carried across the yard, no longer the man who Split would hear. We've found your trail. This isn't a guess, we know for certain, and they know about your wife. A short pause, and then Adeline saw what she would remember for the rest of her life. She watched him set the metal cup on the step and straighten. In one breath, everything she knew about him fell from his shoulders like a coat off a hook. He didn't grow taller or larger. What changed was the way he stood, the way he looked at the world, and suddenly the whole yard full of men seemed to contract around him. How long? No more than an hour, sir. The second car will take my wife first. Use the north tunnel, stay off the bridge. 2 escort vehicles, one ahead to clear the way. Yes, sir. Terence, sir. Listen carefully, if anything happens on the road, she's the priority, not the cargo, not the documents, not me, her. Understood? He turned to Adeline. She was still standing in the doorway, a clothespin in her hand. Go inside and pack, only the old suitcase, nothing else. She opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. Adeline, yes, she heard her own voice. She stepped into the room and paused for a moment in the middle of the clean floor, then did exactly as he said. She folded a few changes of clothes, took the notebook with her shifts, touched her blouse to check that the photograph was still there, and finally placed the box of antibiotics at the very bottom of the suitcase. When she came out, the car door was already open. They left the harbour as dusk began to fall. Adeline sat in the back seat, the glass so thick that the wind outside was reduced to a distant hum, and the door closed with the heavy sound of a bank vault. She turned and looked out the window. The warehouses receded. The concrete lot receded. The shelter where the man had sat in the shadows for months so no one would recognize him receded. Then the whole harbour slowly became a thin strip of yellow lights on black water. Adeline pressed her forehead to the glass. Who the hell did I marry? She whispered. No one in the car answered. The car didn't stop in any neighbourhood Adeline knew. It descended a ramp, passed through a steel door that closed behind them, and a lift took her straight to the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the bay. When the doors opened, all of Boston lay before her under the night sky. In the distance, at the edge of the dark water, she could see the tiny chain of yellow lights of the fish market she had just left. On the wall in the hall was a single name in metal letters, Gallagher. She stood staring at it, the last piece of the truth she had already glimpsed at the docks. He came out of the corridor behind her. The torn coat was gone, his face clean-shaven. He wore an immaculate white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Only the scar on his forearm remained the same. She didn't ask about the luxury, the cars, or the people who bowed to him in the rain. She had seen enough to understand the scale of his power. Instead, she looked past the glittering skyscrapers and turned to him. I don't care about this building or the name on the wall, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I saw what happened in the harbour. You're not a man hiding from the world, you're a man who rules it. So stop feeding me scraps of the truth, Ronan. Tell me what we're running from. Ronan was silent for a long moment, his eyes on her. Then he pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Are you sure you want to know everything? You once told me the less I know, the safer I'd be, she answered. But today I was put in an armoured car under armed guard. If I'm going to share your life, I'm not doing it blindfolded. He nodded slowly and told her everything. He told her about the piers on the east side of the bay, the warehouses, the hands through which goods entered and left the city. He told her about his youth, how a boy from the harbour had risen to where none from those parts could ever reach. He spoke directly, calling things by their names, and then told her about the lines he never crossed. No smuggling, not even in the years when it was the easiest way to make money. No harm to women, no harm to the poor in this district. Anyone who did business with him and broke those 3 rules was cut off. No second warning. Why those 3 rules? You already know why. Adeline was silent. And now, he continued, I'm moving everything into transportation, warehouses, containers, clean documents, all taxes paid. Part of the journey is behind me. The hardest is yet to come. That's why someone in my organization is leaking information. When a machine starts running clean, there are always those who lose their place at the trough. She listened to everything, then looked up, and what stopped him wasn't what she said but the fact that she was shaking. I'm scared. Of me. No, I'm scared of your world. I'm a nurse. All my life I've known only one thing, how to help people stay alive. In your world people just disappear. He didn't argue. Listen carefully, she said. The day I was brought to that harbour I didn't marry your money, I didn't even know you had a cent. I married the humiliation they threw in my face. So now, even if you own this whole building, you can't buy anything more from me. The only thing you can give me is the truth, even the ugliest parts. Then I'll give you the ugliest part, he said. She's not mine. He laid a thin folder on the table. My people traced what happened in your family's house. That night the necklace appeared in your dresser, they didn't just want to drive you out. They needed a police report with your name, prepared in advance, ready to file. The second step was taking you to the harbour and marrying you off to a man without documents, living by the warehouse. Then they planned to present it all to a judge, to make them believe you couldn't care for yourself, and appoint someone from your family as your guardian. Adeline looked at the folder. Care for what? I have nothing. I ask myself the same question, he said, and we traced the anonymous complaint sent to the hospital. It was printed on the printer in your father's study. Late that night in the dressing room, Terence waited at the door while Ronan tied a black bow tie before the mirror. Sir, I still don't understand. The Foster family is completely in your hands. All their debts are yours. One phone call and they'd be finished today. Yes. Then why wait, Gallagher? Ronan adjusted his collar. A blow struck in the dark is for an enemy, Terence. This is different. This concerns my wife's honor. And honor must be restored in daylight under the lights, before the very people who laughed at her. The St. Anne's Hospital charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of an old hotel on the river, where Boston's wealthy gathered once a year to write checks large enough for the newspapers to print their names. This time it was different. This time, the main sponsor was a name that had never appeared on the donor list before, and even as the evening began, no one knew the face of the man behind it. Marlene arrived early on Sabrina's arm, leading her daughter from table to greet the guests. Preston followed, smiling broadly, shaking hands with practiced confidence, and telling anyone who would listen about his upcoming round of funding. Howard came last, silent, gripping a thin leather briefcase in one hand. Adeline arrived later through a side entrance and stood at the edge of the ballroom in a simple dark dress with no jewelry. Several nurses who had once worked with her saw her and immediately turned away. They had heard about the complaint. Then the lights in the ballroom dimmed, and the hospital director took the stage. He thanked the donors, then spoke of the largest donation in the hospital foundation's history, enough to completely rebuild the emergency department and open an additional public clinic by the port. It is my great honor to present the chairman of the Gallagher Group, Mr. Ronan Gallagher. The whole hall applauded. A man rose from the front row and walked onto the stage in a black suit and black bow tie, moving with the unhurried ease of someone who had never needed to rush into any room he entered. The applause continued. Then at the fourth table a glass fell. Sabrina had dropped her wine glass onto the table. Her hand was trembling uncontrollably, her eyes wide. Marlene sat unnaturally straight, her lips parted, her face slowly paling beneath her makeup. Howard rose fully from his chair. "It's him," Sabrina whispered. "Mom, that's the man from the port. Quiet, it really is him, I recognized him right away." I said quiet. But Marlene could no longer tear her eyes from the man on stage. In her mind, the pieces fell into place with swift, merciless clarity. The anonymous investment fund that had bought all her family's debts, the owner whose face no one had ever seen, the man to whom she had sent her butler with an envelope of pocket money and a message that someone was giving him a wife for free. She reached out and gripped the edge of the table. On stage, Ronan spoke briefly, about the port where he grew up, about the people who still waited hours for emergency care, and about how this money was not charity but a repayment of a debt. Then he thanked everyone and stepped down. He never looked toward the fourth table. At the edge of the hall his eyes found Adeline and he gave a slight nod. The whole hall turned, whispers spread. The gala continued, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Marlene sat motionless as a statue. Preston began to sweat, his eyes darting toward the exit. Howard Foster, who had spoken to no one all evening, rose from his chair. Clutching the thin leather briefcase, he walked across the ballroom without stopping near his wife. "Where are you going?" Marlene asked quietly. He didn't answer. In one corner of the hall, 3 men in grey suits sat at a table alongside city officials, their badges pinned to their jackets reading *Economic Crimes Division*. Howard stopped before their table. "My name is Howard Foster," he said. "I have documents concerning Mr. Preston Vaughan. They were gathered by an investigator I hired, spanning 4 states, numerous cases using the same methods, companies registered to non-existent addresses." He set the briefcase on the table, clicked the locks and slid it toward them. One of the men took the first stack of papers, quickly scanned it, then looked at him. "You're aware this man is about to marry your daughter, Mr. Foster?" "Yes," Howard answered. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. "That's exactly why I brought this here." He straightened his back. "I had one moment in my life when I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I'm not going to stay silent a second time." The 3 men in grey suits didn't wait for dinner to end. They rose, walked around 2 rows of tables and approached Preston Vaughan just as he was laughing with a guest about the market in the coming quarter. The man in front leaned down and whispered a short phrase in his ear. Preston's smile vanished in half a second. "There's some mistake. Please step outside and speak with us. I'm at my fiancé's celebration. You can come out on your own or we can do this another way. The choice is yours." Preston stood. He still had time to adjust his collar, still time to smile at the 2 neighboring tables as if it were all a misunderstanding. And then, when they moved his arms behind his back, the whole room heard the metallic click of handcuffs. Sabrina jumped up. Marlene grabbed her daughter's arm and pulled her back into her seat, her gaze fixed straight ahead. They led Preston through the center of the room past all the turning heads. When he neared the exit, he stopped. "Wait," he said to the man holding his arm. "Before you write your report, let me make this easier. I know what I'm losing, but I have something worth trading. Say it at the station. If I say it here, the right people will hear." He turned his head, scanned the room, and stopped when he found Ronan. "You think I just decided to target this family on my own? Someone paid me to get close to the Fosters. Paid in advance, paid in full, and even told me exactly what that family needed so I could offer them the right thing." The whole room fell silent. Marlene turned. "Who?" someone asked. Preston's lips twisted. "You'll find out soon enough, and honestly, I'm not the biggest fish in this room tonight." He laughed. At that moment the lights went out, not just one row, the whole building. Ceiling lights, wall sconces, spotlights, stage lights, corridor lights, all went dark in an instant. The ballroom plunged into such impenetrable darkness that only the pale blue emergency lights above the exits remained. Glass shattered, someone screamed, chairs scraped, and the sound of footsteps turned to chaos. People rushed for the doors. Ronan spoke one word into his microphone. About a minute later, emergency lights flickered on, dim and yellowish. Terence was already beside him. "Sir, where is she?" Terence couldn't answer. Where Adeline had stood at the edge of the ballroom near the west corridor, only an overturned chair remained. Ronan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a message from an unknown number. He read it, then handed the phone to Terence. People pushed toward the exits. No one noticed the man in the black suit, walking against the crowd, toward the dark corridor. "Sir, let me come with you." "No, you have nothing on you, right?" Terence shook his head. Ronan stopped and turned. "Guard the entrance, don't let anyone into that corridor, even our people. And call those 3 investigators. Tell them not to take Preston yet, tonight isn't over." Terence nodded. Ronan walked into the dark corridor. At its end lay an old service area of the hotel, a passage to the basement, a place marked as a blind spot on all security maps. And the man who had once designed the entire security system for Ronan's organization was now waiting for him below. The iron door was ajar. Inside, only one emergency light glowed on the wall. Adeline sat on a plastic chair by a concrete pillar, hands on her knees. Her face was pale, but there was no panic in it. Behind her stood a middle-aged man with grey-streaked hair, dressed in a logistics service suit. "You came alone? Good," said the man. "Walsh, you still remember my name. I'm touched. Let her go." "Not yet." Walsh gestured upward toward the ballroom. "Those people upstairs have Vaughan's files." "I don't care about them. If he goes down, so be it. But I need what only you have. The full report of every cash flow that passed through my hands all these years, the one you locked in the safe the night you shut down all the port channels. Give me that record with your own confirmation that it's destroyed, and I'll return your wife." Ronan stopped in the middle of the corridor. "Do you understand what you've just done?" "Of course," Walsh answered. "I hit you where it hurts most, didn't I?" Adeline looked at neither of them. From the moment she'd been brought there, she had sat still as instructed, but her ears caught something else. The man standing behind her was breathing wrong. It wasn't the ragged breath of someone under pressure. Each time he inhaled, a thin wheeze came from his chest, and each exhale dragged on, as if his lungs refused to release the air. She'd heard that sound 100 times in the emergency room. "Sir," she said. Walsh flinched. "Shut up. You're having an asthma attack." "I said shut up. Keep shouting and let's see how many minutes you'll stay on your feet." He turned to her, about to shout, but the words caught in his throat. His shoulders rose convulsively. He had to brace one hand against the concrete pillar. Ronan stepped forward. "Stay where you are," Walsh rasped. Ronan stopped. Adeline slowly rose from the chair, hands at chest level, palms out. "Look at me, not at him, only at me." He looked at her. His face was losing color, a bluish tint forming around his lips. "Drop your shoulders, don't tense them. The more tension, the more your lungs spasm. Inhale through your nose and count 1, 2. Then purse your lips like you're blowing out a candle and exhale very slowly, counting to 4. Do as I do." She inhaled. He watched, then repeated. "Slower, release all the air before you take another breath. That's it." She stepped half a step forward. "Where's your medication?" He couldn't finish. "Inner or outer pocket?" With a trembling hand, he pointed to his left chest. Adeline reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small plastic inhaler. She shook it vigorously and removed the cap. "First, exhale completely, all the way." She placed the mouthpiece between his lips. "Now take a deep breath, I'll press at the same time. 1, 2, she pressed. He inhaled. "Close your mouth, hold your breath. Count to 10 without breathing." He held it. His shoulders still shook, but the wheezing gradually subsided. She gave him a second dose, then pulled the plastic chair behind him. Sit down, lean forward and rest your elbows on your knees. Keep breathing slowly like before. Walsh sank heavily onto the chair, the inhaler still in his hand. You know me, he said quietly. You know what I'm capable of, you know I have everything to lose. You know me too, Ronan, I'll tell you the truth. His voice was very quiet. All your cash flows are in my hands, you know that. But there's one thing you don't know. The house up north where your wife lives with 2 children still in school, it's registered under an intermediary company. I bought that company last summer. Walsh looked up. There are 3 economic investigators waiting outside. Sooner or later they'll reach you with or without my help. And when they do, everything in your wife's name will be frozen. She'll lose the house, lose her good name, and your children will grow up as headlines in newspapers. What do you want? I want you to go out to them yourself, sit at the table and confess everything. Who paid Vaughan to infiltrate the Foster family, where the money went, and who signed off on it. If you confess, you'll do time, no one can change that. But I'll pay for your lawyer. The house stays in your wife's name. The children keep going to the same school. Stay silent and you'll lose everything, including them. Walsh lowered his head. It was a long time before he could speak. His voice was hoarse and broken. How do you know about all my hiding places? Because I taught you, Ronan answered. Every door, every blind spot. In all the years I've been doing this, I made only one mistake, and she's standing right in front of you. A dry mechanical sound came from the ceiling, and the whole building blazed with light at once. Walsh blinked in the sudden brightness. Then, bracing his hands on his knees, he stood, tucked the inhaler in his pocket and walked out through the iron door to where the 3 men in grey suits were waiting. When Adeline was led back into the main ballroom, the gala had already ended. Chairs were scattered, and only a little over a dozen people remained in the centre of the room. The 3 men in grey suits sat at a long table by the wall. Marlene sat in a row of chairs facing them, back straight, hands on her knees. Sabrina sat one chair away from her mother. Howard stood by the window. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, and the elderly lawyer was led in. Adeline had seen him enter her stepmother's office countless times over the years. He set his briefcase on the table, opened the locks, and spoke before anyone could ask. I want to make a voluntary statement before you come for me yourselves. The man at the head of the table asked who he was. I am the Foster family lawyer, he answered, and I have been for a very long time. Adeline stood at the far end of the ballroom, arms wrapped around herself. From there she caught only fragments. The first fragment was a document pulled from the briefcase and laid on the table. The name on it was her mother's, Margaret Foster. A will, not the one Adeline had heard about in the house, the one that supposedly said her mother had left nothing but a few old things. This one was different. In it her name appeared. The second fragment was 2 words she had to hear 3 times before she understood their meaning. Trust fund. The lawyer said that Margaret had created a fund in her daughter's name, that it was set to automatically open when the child turned 28, and that all these years he had been the one managing it. Upon hearing this, Adeline reached out and gripped the back of the nearest chair. Her whole life she had believed her mother died leaving nothing. Her whole life she had believed she stayed in that house only because she had nothing at all. The third fragment came from the lawyer, in the voice of a man reading his own sentence. He spoke about signatures, how year after year he had signed for her, creating transfer documents for a person who didn't even know what she was supposedly transferring, and how the money had steadily drained from the trust. Everyone in the room already knew where it had gone before he finished the sentence. Adeline didn't look at Marlene. She didn't look at anyone. She remembered all those evenings standing with her phone, transferring every dollar of her paycheck, and she remembered the words she'd been told, that once the debt was paid she could go anywhere. Then came the final fragment. The lawyer pulled out another sheet, just 1 page, covered in the shaky, slanted handwriting of an old man. He said it was testimony from a retired mechanic now living in a nursing home west of the city, who had called him 2 weeks ago because he didn't want to take this secret to his grave. The testimony contained 2 things. First, on the night Margaret Foster died, she hadn't been visiting anyone or shopping. She had been driving to the lawyer's office because she already had an appointment to completely rewrite her will. Second, there was only 1 line. The old mechanic wrote that he had taken money that year. The whole room fell silent. Adeline stood rooted to the spot at the far end of the room. She didn't cry. She only felt a ringing in her ears and one thought repeated over and over. All these years she had believed her mother had abandoned her when in truth her mother had been driving to fight for her. The man at the head of the table turned to Marlene. Did you know about this, Mrs. Foster? Marlene didn't answer right away. She stared straight ahead. I didn't touch anything. I didn't ask if you touched it, I asked if you knew. A very long silence followed. I knew, she said. How long have you known? A very long time. Sabrina turned to her mother, her lips trembling, but no words came out. Howard remained by the window, his shoulders slumped, one hand gripping the frame as if he could no longer stand without support. At dawn, after everyone else had been led out, the director of St. Anne's Hospital approached Adeline. In his hand was the employee badge she had placed on the conference table that day. The complaint has been found to be fabricated, Miss Foster, he said. On behalf of the hospital, I offer you my apologies. Your shifts are still waiting for you. Adeline took the badge. She held it tight in her hand and still didn't cry. There was one more thing in the lawyer's leather briefcase, a sealed envelope with yellowed edges, still glued with the same adhesive from years ago. On the front were only a few words, for Adeline from Mom. She brought it home but didn't open it immediately. She waited for morning for a moment when she could sit alone in her little room, sunlight falling through the window, and only then did she break the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. Written in haste, in the slightly slanted hand of a woman burdened with 100 cares, yet who still found time to say what needed to be said. Her mother wrote that if ever a day came when Adeline felt unloved in her own home, she must remember one thing: it wasn't her fault. She wrote that Adeline was the truest and most right thing she had ever done in her life. Adeline read the last line, folded the letter again, pressed it to her chest and wept. She cried as if she had held everything in for years, no longer hiding, and outside the door, a man waited until the room was quiet before coming in. That afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy came to see her. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands on her knees, and pulled an old photograph from her sweater pocket. In it were two young women in nurses' uniforms, smiling at the camera at the entrance to the emergency room. One was Mrs. Dorothy, young. The other had the same eyes Adeline saw in the mirror every morning. I was the head nurse at St. Anne's, said Mrs. Dorothy. Your mother was my closest friend. Adeline couldn't speak. I recognized you the day they brought you to the harbour. I knew you right away by your hands. Then why didn't you? Because I made a promise to your mother. She once told me, if my little girl can stand on her own 2 feet, she'll be strong for the rest of her life. So I could only support you, but I was never allowed to carry you. Adeline looked at the photograph in her hands. All her life, she had believed that nursing was something she had settled for, after her own dream had been buried. But it was the path her mother had walked before her, and Adeline had followed it without even knowing. In the following week, everything fell into place. Marlene was charged. She never asked Adeline for forgiveness, only whether the newspapers would print her name. Sabrina came to see her and stood in the doorway for a long time before she could speak. I hated you because you had nothing, and yet someone loved you truly. I had everything, but no one ever loved me like that. Adeline said nothing. She only poured her a glass of water. Howard came last and knelt in the middle of the floor. Adeline bent and helped him up. I forgive you, Dad, she said, but I'm not coming back to that house. First, I need to learn to live for myself. That night, Ronan laid a thick folder before her. He said it contained all the documents needed to dissolve the shadow side of his business and complete the transition to legal transportation, and that he would lose a great deal. He said all her life, other people had made choices for her, and he would not be the next to do so. From this day on, he would be truly hers, and whether to accept him or not was entirely her decision. Adeline looked at the folder, then at him. She said she had decided to stay, and that she had decided to take things slowly. That spring, in the concrete yard before the row of warehouses, a free public clinic opened its doors under the name Margaret *. People began lining up early in the morning, dockworkers, fishmongers, and those who had spent their whole lives afraid even to approach a hospital, dreading the enormous bills. Local children were given balloons and ran shrieking in circles around the yard, their laughter echoing over the entire harbour, bouncing off the very walls that had once heard the same carefree laughter. Mrs. Dorothy brought a large pot of soup, set it on the table, and looked at the man and wife standing on the porch. Usually people get married when they see only the best in each other, she said, but you two have already seen each other at your worst. That's what it really means to be husband and wife. This story teaches us several simple but profound lessons. Never judge a person by their clothes, for beneath the most tattered rags can lie the noblest hearts. Kindness given in silence is never wasted, it will return exactly when it's needed most. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing not to let the past dictate your future. If today's story touched your heart, please like it, share it with those close to you, and subscribe to our channel so you can hear such important stories every day. What do you think about Adeline and Ronan? Leave us a few words in the comments, because the thoughts you share from the heart are what we most look forward to. We sincerely wish you good health, happiness, and peace of mind every day. That's all for today. Goodbye and see you in the next video.